It was also a very highly educated place. This is a Byzantine university, and at certain periods in the empire, they had something approaching 100% literacy, and that included women. There were three parts of the Byzantine educational system. First is primary education. Everyone got that. That's reading, writing, a little homework thrown in. Secondary education is between the ages of 10 and 16, mostly boys. And then the university is available in the big cities. You can never tell who your classmates were as well. For example, St. Basil of Caesarea, who's one of the Eastern fathers of the Orthodox Church. He's also the Greek Santa Claus. His head is preserved in a monastery in Mount Athos. He was classmates with Julian the Apostate, who was a Byzantine Roman emperor who tried to re-paganize the empire. I imagine there were some very interesting conversations while they were supposedly listening to the instructor. It didn't matter where you came from. You could be from Africa, you could be from Asia Minor, you could be from Greece. Where you were from was no bar to social advancement. The cities were a nice place to be, especially because there were excellent hospitals. If you got sick, you could go to a hospital. Here's a picture of one. They had separate wings for diseases, separate disease. They had doctors who specialized, and some of the doctors were women. If you were a woman in Byzantium, I'm not sure there's any place you would want to go. Let me just start with this. As a woman, if you could go back in time, there'd be no place you could go where you were treated fairly and similar, equal to a man. But at least in the Byzantine Empire, you could become a doctor, you could become a merchant, you could stay at home and raise the kids. There were options for you. But in hospitals, what we have here on the right is the first ever surgical manuscript. It dates from roughly 900. So it was a pretty advanced place. But wherever you traveled in the empire, if you walked from what is modern Morocco, all the way through North Africa, up Asia Minor, and into Eastern Europe, you would come across familiar things. All the cities would be laid out the same way. You'd see familiar arches, you'd see familiar structures, and there was a unity to the Mediterranean world that there really isn't now. This is a picture of an aqueduct, happens to be in Africa. This delivered water to the city of Carthage. This aqueduct is in Palestine, delivered water to the city of Caesarea. And this aqueduct supplied the imperial city of Constantinople. Most citizens of the empire would be familiar with the Colosseum, the Flavian Colosseum, but it was by no means the only one. You could go to Tunisia, for example, and be in this one, which is slightly smaller. You could wander on over to Libya, which at the hometown of the only Libyan emperor of the Roman Empire, Septimius Severus. This one's slightly smaller. Or even in Croatia, you could visit this Colosseum, this amphitheater. What really destroyed this unity, what really destroyed this world, was the coming of Islam. And that happened essentially during the reign of the Emperor Constans II, our man right there on the left with the impressive beard. Constans II, however, was a strong emperor, and this is the last chance the Roman Empire has of preserving that common culture around the Mediterranean. Constans II decided to raise a large army. He needed money for that, so he started taxing, very heavy taxes. He took a trip to Rome, the first emperor to do so in several centuries. And while he was in Rome, he didn't win any friends because he was only there to collect money. And since there wasn't a lot of money in Rome, that meant going around to the various monuments and stripping them of whatever precious metals they had. He even had workmen crawl around on the top of the Pantheon and strip the lead so it could be melted down for the army. In 668, he finally had his army, but he also had a lot of unhappy citizens. who were annoyed. They didn't want a single more tax. And so one of them, a chamberlain, snuck into his bath, and as the emperor was reposing, he smashed a soapdish over his head and killed him. That is really the last time the Romans were capable of checking, if they ever were, of checking the spread of Islam. And very quickly, the empire collapsed. Most of the imperial territories collapsed. What wasn't conquered was just thrown away. Alexandria, which is the main city in Egypt, surrendered voluntarily. Sicily, the governor of Sicily, murdered his wife and then abducted a nun. And to escape imperial justice, he figured, let's invite the emir from over here into Sicily. And he did so. The emir came with his army, killed the governor, and then took over Sicily, although it did take about 100 years. The governor of Septim, this little town right here, which was guarding the entrance into Spain, he had a daughter who was having an affair with the Visigothic king of Spain, and he was annoyed at this, so he decided, let's just let the Arabs in, let them cross. By the way, the Arabs were led by a man named Tariq, and he landed in the shade of a giant rock, which still bears his name, Gibraltar, the Rock of Tariq. But very quickly, the empire loses, you can see, more than half of its territory. And this is a shocking thing, it's a traumatic thing for the empire. People keep looking to Constantinople for help, for a counter-offensive, and nothing ever happens. And the reason for that, one way to explain the astonishing collapse of the empire, is that emperors in Constantinople are completely and utterly concentrated on Constantinople. And some of them don't even care what's happening around them. They become very myopic. The best example of this I can think of is an emperor in the year 820. His name was Leo V. And Leo V had a buddy by the name of Michael. He couldn't speak very well. His nickname is Michael the Stammerer. But the two of them were close friends. They murdered the emperor, and Leo was crowned emperor. His friend Michael was a big talker, and he kept saying things like, you know what, I should be emperor. And I think I'll kill Leo. He's not showing me the respect he needs. Word eventually reached Leo that his friend Michael was saying these things, so he told him to tone it down, but they were friends, so he said, just stop saying things like that. Michael, of course, was unable to stop doing things like that. That's the kind of man he was. And eventually he was, on Christmas Eve of 820, he was dragged in front of Leo V. And Leo asked him point blank, did you say that you were going to plot to kill him? And to his great surprise, instead of denying it, Michael said, yeah. Not a good strategy for a long life. And Leo flew into a rage, and he said, immediately, you're going to be executed. But you know what? Normal execution is too good for you. You should be tied to an ape and thrown into the furnace. An ape? Really? Were apes that common? Just, the emperor wants an ape, then go run and get an ape, number one. Number two, isn't really that a waste of a good ape? What's really happening here, this is a throwback to ancient Roman, and I'm talking about Republican Rome, ancient Roman days. The ancient Romans, if you were guilty of parricide or fratricide, you were sentenced to death by being sewn into a sack. First you'd get beaten so that you were bleeding, and then you'd get sewn inside a sack with a rooster, a viper, and a monkey. And then you were thrown into the river Tiber. And the reason why they did this was because you're supposed to be humiliated with these shrieking animals. Death, it's too good for you. You need to be humiliated as well.